The Congress of South African Trade Unions has thrown its weight behind the ANC for the upcoming local government elections. The Federation's Secretariat report, debated by the Central Committee meeting, lists the consequences of the high cost of widespread corruption and its devastating impact on jobs. Well, let's talk about some of those outcomes of the seventh Central Committee meeting. We're joined by COSATU President Zingisa Losi. Zingisa, good evening to you, and thanks for your time tonight. You know, when one looks at the journey that trade unions have walked over the past year to 18 months, really under COVID-19, the plight of workers and various issues, affecting workers have really been exacerbated by the pandemic. And we've seen, back and forth between COSATU, the ANC. Do you think there's ever been a time where the tension between COSATU and the ANC was as visible and involved as many issues as we have seen perhaps over the last 2 years?
Good evening, Kathy, and thanks for having me on the platform. Yes, indeed, we're coming from the 7th Central Committee, which passed and reaffirmed other resolutions that were coming from the 13th National Congress. The relationship with COSATU and the African National Congress, it has always been by its nature a relationship that would, of course, have its own challenges because of the constituency that we represent. In the past 18 months, as you say, we are coming, for an example, from the COVID-19 that exacerbated the challenges that workers are facing in our country. Some of those challenges also are not new, but they have just been exacerbated by that. I think at the core of them is the issue of the public sector wage bill, which had gone to court. But overall, when COSATU looked into exactly in the months that you are making reference to, and the things that we have achieved as workers surpasses the challenges that we would, if we want to interpret our relationship with the ANC as one would think that it is bad, to think that I think the ANC has had an ear to COSATU. You would recall that we went to NEDLEC. We made proposals in relation to the COVID-19 Terrorist Relief Fund, which government of the ANC acceded to. We have gone and demanded the 350 social grants, which people had received, and a number of interventions now that we have made, and in relation to workers being able to withdraw their pension funds. And we are looking forward to that in November being announced by Treasury, and we hope that for us, these are the reasons that the Central Committee looked into and said, yes, we understand that we are in a relationship with the ANC, and that relationship is never a straight line, but we appreciate the challenges, but we also appreciate the achievements that we have achieved as workers under the government of the African National Congress.
Of course, depending on who you speak to, the successes that you're listing cannot be solely attributed to COSATU. You've had different social partners that have come through to also lobby for some of these initiatives. So, to what extent can COSATU really take credit for the TARS fund, for the 350 rand relief of distress grant?
All those proposals are proposals that were made by COSATU. We drafted them. We brought them to NEDLEC. And it is then when we went to debate them at NEDLEC that the rest of other social partners became part of it, because of course we were not talking to ourselves. But for an example, look at the ESCOM Social Compact. Those are policy interventions that COSATU start drafting, because we're a federation that does not look at only what are the challenges, but we're able to foresee how we can move forward in trying to resolve those challenges. So we came up with those proposals. We brought them to NEDLEC. They are COSATU proposals. And then NEDLEC constituencies there endorsed those, and they became a NEDLEC social partners proposals to the parliament. But fundamentally, they are our COSATU policy interventions that we brought at NEDLEC. So that is why we are able to claim them.
Of course, one of the things that, was not as successful as unions would have hoped it would be the wage sector negotiations and the extent to which, there was very little concession that took place there in terms of what workers wanted versus what they got out. So how do you reconcile then, giving full support to the governing party when you know that the bulk of your members are still very disgruntled with this issue of the wage increases?
Indeed, as I said, that this relationship with the ANC, for an example, we're talking about government that is an employer, where negotiations are taking place at the level of the PSCPC. You have unions there that are negotiating at the level of their members. They went to settle, others did not sign the agreement. Now you have disputes, you have a procedure that disputes must be followed. But of course, our relationship with the African National Congress is not measured on the basis of one sector. It is a relationship of COSATU, which COSATU is constituted by the entirety of its membership, including the private sector. So when we make an analysis of our relationship with the ANC, it would not be fair if we are to use a one-sided approach when we make such an analysis. But I must also add that the very same members of the unions in the public sector are members of COSATU. They are part of these decisions. They came to the Central Committee with their proposals that indeed the African National Congress, it is the only political party that is still, in having a good relationship with ourselves as workers in our country. So therefore, it is not just COSATU in terms of those that are holding office as national office bearers, but we are coming from a central committee that is constituted of 18 affiliates of the Federation, including those that are in dispute with government in the public sector in relation to the 2018 wage bill. So it is not an easy decision that COSATU has arrived at, but it was a well-thought a decision that we have arrived at, having to weigh the good and the bad, and what is it that we can take out of it.
Speaking about the Central Committee, you also had as one of your guests for the opening session, COSATU's Zwelinzima Mavavi, and I believe another representative from COSATU. Talk to us about the message and the campaign that Mr. Vavi has really been on to try and get unions to speak from the same voice, to form some kind of partnership that will strengthen the voice of workers in this country. What are we to read in the fact, into the fact that he was part of this opening session?
Well, I must also indicate that COSATU invited 4 federations. We invited 3. We invited NATU, FEDUSA, and SAFTU. And because it is us as a federation that made that decision, and it is informed by the 13th National Congress resolution that we took of uniting the workers in our country, irrespective of the color of their T-shirt. You will remember, Kathy, that coming from the 13th National Congress, we said as a federation that we are guided by a one country, one federation, which is what COSATU, when it was formed, believed in, and one sector, one union. So in us advancing our own conference resolution, which were not taken in the last Congress, but were as a result when COSATU was given birth to, in realizing that, we said this is what COSATU should also be doing, because we cannot take decisions and leave other people to implement them. So having Comrade Zweli in our opening session of the Central Committee was as a result of a COSATU 30th National Congress resolution. Hence, you did not have only him there and the president, but you also had other 2 federations.
Of course, having somebody part of a session and the other unions that you've spoken about is quite different to being able to act together as unions. How far are we from that? The point where the commitment actually translates into tangible action.
We have, Kathy, remember there was a COSATU march that we undertook where during COVID, when COSATU was also joined by SAFTU and other two federations. Also, when SAFTU had its march, they invited us, but it was happening on the same day that we're having a CC of the federation, and we afforded our apology. In terms of our own unions in the sectors, you would remember that we have unions of COSATU, SATAU, at the SAA that has been working side by side with other trade unions, including NUMSA, in terms of the mining industry, construction. You have NUMSA there working with NUM. And so and also in the public sector, you have trade unions from FEDUSA working with trade unions in COSATU. So in terms of practicalizing it, this is what we have been doing long before we then call each other in events that takes place in after 2 years.
All right, Ms. Losi, let's wrap it up with the issue of the request being made for workers to be able to withdraw from their pension funds. You said earlier on in this interview that you're expecting an announcement from Treasury on this issue before the year wraps up. What are the discussions that are taking place? Because we saw that the initial feedback to that proposal has been seemingly largely rejected by businesses.
Look, what we know is that the proposal that we made is a proposal that was even agreed to at the level of Parliament, and even Treasury agreed to it. What we expect is to hear in the midterm budget in November that Treasury pronounces on it. Workers are withdrawing from their own pension funds, so there can be no justification that business will then reject onto that, because you cannot have workers that are struggling to live. And currently now, you have workers that are at the age of 45. Pension is far too long. And when it suits business, workers can take provident fund because of business transactions, and then they can use those provident fund or pension fund as securities for long-term loans. But workers are saying, we want to live now, today. So that is why we are not saying a complete withdrawal, as you know, but we're saying a certain percentage. Of course, there's a long process that must undergo. You have to take that bill to Parliament, amend it, take it to Parliament. So it is not a once-off a moment when an announcement is going to be made. We are all going to work together to ensure that it is a success, but at the same time, those that are withdrawing, when they go to retirement, they don't sit at home with nothing.
COSATU President Zingisa Losi, let me thank you for your time tonight on News at Prime.